Hi, I'm Rob Boss. Welcome to another episode of Screen Printing. Well, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the exposure of your images on your screen. In a previous episode, we talked about the process of coating your screen in anticipation of creating a stencil that can be used to print images. For that purpose, most importantly, we're going to need to create a transparency that incorporates your image. Your images will be frequently created on the computer and then printed on a transparent film like this. The ink is a black opaque ink that will block light from getting to the emulsion on your screen. The process that we use is primarily in a dark area. I want to demonstrate something that's very important to you when you expose your screen. This screen is not coated with an emulsion, but when you place your image down for exposure, you want to make sure that you put it down so that it's right reading. Now, what we mean by that is you're actually looking at, in this particular case, the text reading in the direction it normally would read. So it's right reading. We want to be especially careful that we don't accidentally expose our screens with that transparency flipped over in the wrong direction. Once that exposure of the screen is made, it isn't possible to correct this. So we want to make sure that we get it set correctly when we do the actual exposure. So now, let's take a second and step into the exposure studio and go through the steps that are involved in the actual exposure. Okay, Rob Boss, and we're back again. We're going to continue our exposure process. We're now in the exposure room, and we're standing at an exposure table that's open, ready to be used. There's a large surface of glass here, which is where light is going to come through to expose your screen. That large area of glass, you want to make certain it's very clean. Any particles of dirt, fingerprints, etc. on that surface can cause adverse effects on your screen, leave little holes that make it more difficult to execute a nice clean print. So for that reason, we keep some Windex or a suitable product here along with some paper towels so that you can clean the glass. I've done that already, so I'm going to set those aside briefly, and we're going to go ahead and prep for the exposure process. I've placed my transparency on the light table, or the exposure table, I'm sorry. I make sure that it's right reading, as we talked about in the earlier part of the video. I now have my screen, which has a coating of emulsion on it that's ready to go. I want to make absolutely certain that that emulsion is dry. If I put my hands anywhere on the screen and I feel the emulsion is wet, I need to wait until it is completely dry. Once it is completely dry, I'm ready for the exposure. So I'm going to take the screen and I'm going to lay it over my transparency. And one of the great things about these emulsions is that they're fairly transparent themselves, so you can see right through them to make sure that you're positioning your image properly on the screen. You want to try to make sure that you got fairly equal spacing around the screen. You don't want to have your transparency really close to one edge or another. Try to keep it pretty much central to the screen itself. Once you have that arranged and organized, you're going to take these small ropes and you're going to set them in here to prevent a vacuum from forming on the screen, the exposure table, I should say, and it'll also make it easier to complete the exposure process. Once that's all in place, you're going to take the exposure table cover and you're going to bring it down, and there are these latches here that you are going to use to hold the cover down. And we'll take the second one over here and latch it. And we're ready now to turn on the vacuum to the table, which is going to force this mat down onto our screen to create a very, very close, tight contact between our transparency and our emulsion coated fabric on the screen. So we're going to start by turning on, with the red switch here, the vacuum pump, and you'll hear a slight noise as that vacuum pump pulls the air out of the screen exposure table. We can begin to see the rope showing up here a little bit, so that process of forcing that mat down onto the actual screen is beginning to take place. Now, when this gets completely set and ready to go, the sound of the vacuum will actually change slightly. And that's your indication that you can go ahead and begin to apply the light, the actual exposure. So you can begin to see now that this is forming. We can see our little ropes in here that are providing a little bit of air access. And now there's been a shift in the sound. So we're ready to go. We have our timer set over here at 1 minute 30 seconds. And we have a switch there to turn on the light, and it will go on and turn off automatically once that 1 minute and 30 seconds is done. After that process is complete, we can then take our screen out to a washout sink and begin to clear it for actual use in the printing process. So, in addition, we've got information on the actual exposure process, which is posted above the exposure table. And that is a good secondary resource to make sure that you're using the proper steps to execute your exposure on the screen. Hi, Rob Boss. We're now out of the exposure room, and we're before the washout sink, where we're going to clear the stencil in our screen to prepare it for printing. In this process, there is one very important step to remember, and that is we only want to use cold water at this stage. We do not use the pressure washer to wash our screen out. If we do, there's a very good chance we will actually damage our stencil. So only cold water using a traditional nozzle on a hose is really probably the best way to approach this. So I'm going to turn on my cold water now, and I want to make sure that the water actually is cold. In the lab here, it's possible that the pipes will warm up some overnight. So make sure that you check your water to make sure it actually is cool. We don't want a lot of pressure at first. We want just a very limited amount of pressure, and we want to simply soak. And when we do, you can see that the actual stencil begins to become evident. We want to soak the screen from both sides. I'll rotate it. And then I'll rotate it again to make sure that the entire surface of the emulsion has received a good water treatment. At the next stage, we're going to turn our water pressure up slightly, and that will allow us to begin to blast the unexposed portion of the emulsion out of the screen. So these areas here are areas of the emulsion that have not been exposed. The lighter portions, the darker portions have been exposed. So I'm going to try to wash those parts out of the screen and keep these in place. So I'll turn up my pressure now. And this will be a little noisy, but here we go. I'm going to stop briefly to say you can notice almost immediately that we can begin to see the yellow color, of the actual screen itself. So that indicates, at least initially, that we are beginning to clear the emulsion from the screen. Okay, it looks like I've removed most of my emulsion now. I'm going to flip my screen over and give it a quick rinse from the other side as well. Make sure that there aren't any loose parts of remaining emulsion. Having done that, I want to do a quick visual inspection. So I'm going to drain the screen very quickly, try to make sure I don't spill large amounts of water on the floor and examine the screen with background light. And that can help significantly in helping me determine whether I've got a good clean washout. The washout looks good here, so there's still one remaining step. And that is, I need to do a flush of the screen with very low pressure. And what I'm going to do now is remove any residual sensitizer which may remain in the screen after I've cleared the emulsion itself. And that is done by simply running water down the stencil very gently from top to bottom for about 1 minute on each side. If you fail to do this, there's a good chance that your screen will actually be blocked up and it will not print very well. So we start from the top and simply roll the water down to the bottom. And this allows us to flush that material out of the screen. 1 minute on one side and 1 minute on the other. Once you've completed that flushing process, then you can simply drain the screen and it can be set out anywhere because the exposure is done now. We do have a fan in the studio, and sometimes we place the screens before a fan. We also have a dry sink. It can be set in a dry sink and it can air dry as well. And at that point, you should be ready to print your screen. So this is Rob Boss, and we want to thank you again for attending this episode, and we look forward to seeing you in future episodes as well.